Thanks so much and welcome to our session. I'm excited to be with my co-author, Bob Moesta, my friend. We wrote Choosing College together. I'm Michael Horn, co-founder of the Clayton Christensen Institute and a senior strategist at Guild. Bob is the founder of the Rewired Group and the originator of the jobs to be done theory. Bob, it's good to see you online at the ASU GSV Summit. I told you we would bring you down here eventually. I didn't think it would be virtual though.
That's all right. I'm happy to be here. Excited to cover the topics we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, likewise. And to that end, I'm going to dive in and share my screen and just do a very quick whirlwind, because for those joining in, I don't want to obsess over our book, Choosing College, and what we found. We want to talk about lessons that we take going forward and really pushing us into the future. But I do want to level set very briefly, just some quick slides, which is, Bob and I wrote this book, Choosing College, How to Make Better Learning Decisions Throughout Your Life. One of the worst parts about it is the title, because it's not just college, it's really any learning after you're in high school, as you're learning throughout your life. But it's premised on this job to be done theory, methodology that Bob and Clay Christensen, our joint mentor, created and popularized. And I just wanted to do the whirlwind version of what a job to be done is, because like disruptive innovation, it's taken on a lot of different definitions. And when we talk about it, what we're really talking about is it's the progress someone is seeking in a struggling circumstance. So I want to get from point A to point B. I have some sense of struggle and I need to make progress. And that the job to be done captures and encapsulates all of that. And really what it's in some ways talking about is what motivates people. And it's not just like getting higher education, or as the famous Harvard professor used to say, people don't want to buy just the quarter-inch drill. They don't want just the product. They want the freaking hole itself. But I would say that even this doesn't capture the full thinking of jobs to be done, because it leaves out the context that someone's in, that struggling circumstance, and asking, why do they want the hole? Is it to hang a fancy picture? Is it for some wiring just behind, for your TV or something like that? Does it have to look fancy? What kind of material are you poking through? All of that situational awareness, that struggling moment, is really important to understand. And it's something that Bob says all the time, which is the struggling moment is the seed for innovation. And what we're going to focus on here is it's certainly the seed for innovation for individuals seeking to make progress, for them to innovate in effect, for them to do something different and make progress in their lives. But it's also the moment for entrepreneurs and education organizations, established organizations, for them to innovate amidst people's struggle to unlock that progress for all people. And when you think about this job to be done, it's focusing on causation that explains why people make the choices they do. And so we're not just talking about persona-based thinking or lopping people into demographics based on their age or how many kids they have or things like that. We're really trying to understand the situation and causality of what causes them to do something different. As a result, it's not something that you can sit in your boardroom and say, well, I think the job to be done we do for, person X is this. You really got to get out there and look at life as it's actually been lived, and look at the trade-offs that people are making as they make a choice, and looking at the real ones and what is that process of making progress, and really being very cognizant about what's that circumstance that they're in, because that's the reference point where, as Bob would say, you establish value, but it also helps you understand what trade-offs are you willing to make, because you can't have it all in life. You're going to make some different trade-offs, and it's really important to understand what you value when, and that when is that circumstance. Last thing I'll say on this, and then I'll do a really quick summary of what we found in the book, and then I'll dive into pestering Bob with questions. Is I think a misreading of jobs to be done has been, people say, oh, there's functional jobs and there's social jobs and there are emotional jobs. And what we found anyway is that jobs to be done, they have functional elements, they have social elements, and they have emotional elements. And any given job actually has a different mix of all three. And some jobs are intensely social and emotional, more so than functional. And others are, different mixes of that. But jobs, it's not just one reason that you do something. It's the encapsulation of the multi-faceted set of reasons that you do something. All right, last thing, and then I'll get out of this, and Bob, we'll have a conversation. But in our book, Choosing College, we came up with 5 jobs to be done. The first one was what we call help me get into my best school. So these were students who were going to school literally for its own sake of being able to say, I got into my best. And they sort of felt like it was the next logical step on their journey. It was about having this classic college experience that they were promised. They had done the work to be the best, and they sort of felt like that they deserved it now. And it was much more education as a benefit they were entitled to than a real investment, I think is a fair way to say it. The second one we found was almost the flip side of this. It was help me do what's expected of me. So these were students who were going because someone else expected of them, not because they were intrinsically interested in it. Then the third one we found was what we call help me get away. These were students who were running from something, but not necessarily towards something. They just needed to get out of a really bad situation. And college was something socially acceptable that they could say that they were going to go do. But they weren't really sold on the experience itself. And you had really bad success rates in help me do what's expected of me and going to get away, because there was no intrinsic desire in either of them, a real sense of purpose. The fourth one we found is what we call, and I'm losing myself now, help me step it up, right? And so help me step it up was students who were like life wasn't as they had wanted it to be. And they said, this isn't who I am. I can do more. I can be more. And now is the time for me to step it up. And it's now or never because time is running out. And the sense of time was really important in this job. It was like people were depending on them and they could almost see the window closing in on them and they had to make a change. And often this was adult learners who were like, this dead end job, this isn't who I am. I'm going to go do something different. And education was the conduit to do something different and most convenient, affordable, accessible was what they wanted. And then the last one we found was what we call help me extend myself. And help me extend myself was really for people, there was very little push of the situation. They looked around and they're like, life is pretty good. But I've always wanted to do X, or I've always wanted to challenge myself and see if I could do Y. I'd like to learn more. And now is the time I'm going to be able to, I have the time and I'm going to make the budget to make this a priority at this point in my life and go tackle this. And people in this job tended to be supremely satisfied no matter what resulted from it. So that's the whirlwind summary. The reason we did this research was not honestly just to find the jobs to be done. It was so that we could give people advice on what to do with it, and for organizations, institutions, entrepreneurs to better design experiences, to really decide this is what we're going to be good at and this is what we're going to suck at, and design better experiences around it. And so, Bob, the first question I want to turn to you with on this as we start to riff back and forth. And by the way, folks, put questions in, send your questions in because we'll tackle them as well. And Bob, we don't always get his time in the education world. So this is a good opportunity to ask the master innovator, but as you think about COVID-19 having hit, right, society, has it changed the jobs to be done that we found in choosing college, or has it just amplified certain elements of them, like the social and emotional pieces of them?
So I don't think the underlying character of them have changed, but I think it's actually shifted the portfolio of what people do. And so people who were in, for example, help me get into my best school, right? They felt like school was going to take care of them. They were going to basically go do it. It was going to I want the college experience. It's all of a sudden, it's like what COVID has done is said like, well, I don't know what best means anymore. And I know that online is not what it meant before. And so a lot of these students who used to be in that job are literally, they're now choosing things like a gap year, right? Versus versus people who wanted to escape. I believe that there's more people who want to get away right now, because it's one of those things like I was a teacher, and now it's like I don't really like being a teacher anymore, and now I want to go do something else. And so all of a sudden it's like there's people who don't want to be virtual, for example. It's like, what else can I do? And so I think it's shifted the portfolio, but the reality is what COVID has done is it's really brought struggling moments and amplified them, but the pathways are still intact. The direction that people go, and again, think of it this way: is like I love the job. Help me extend myself. It's one of the prerequisites there is I have time, or I'm choosing to make time. Well, now that people have time, is like, maybe I should go back to school and learn how to program, or maybe I should, because you can't go on vacation, you can't go out to dinner, you can't do a bunch of things. And so I think the reality is like the portfolio shifted. And so some of these schools who counted on get me into my best school and, at school, I'll figure it out. Those are walking away, but there's other opportunities that are emerging at the same time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, and to me, what I hear you saying is the jobs are still the jobs, but
Right.
what we can hire to make progress in any of those jobs, that may have changed for a lot of individuals. We've become, I think, more conscious as consumers, and I'm curious your take on this, but I think people have become more conscious that like they don't just have to go on the train to quote unquote the best school for them or whatever else. Like they have more options, and they can act as consumers do in other markets to make more choices.
That's right. Again, I think one of the main reasons why we wrote the book was to help consumers be better consumers. A lot of times people were picking where to go, but not why to go. And if we can actually make people explicit about why they're going, and to be honest, help frame the struggling moment of why they're really, what progress they're really trying to make by going, because it's a very large decision economically. It's a very big commitment from a time perspective, and we know that if you don't actually make it through, there's a lot to lose. And so it's a very big risk. And so I think it's that kind of thinking that is where I think now people are, because the struggling moment of COVID has caused them to take a step back and look and think, and now they're actually trying to figure out kind of what are my real options, and what are some alternative options, because at some point of where they're at. So I think that's the bigger part, is people becoming way more conscious about it. And at the same time, the fact is I still think the pathways are true.
Yeah, that's helpful. So the second question I have, and I promise for those listening, I'm going to shift to, so what do you do if you're an organization or an entrepreneur in a moment, but I'm just sort of staying on the research for a moment. You've continued to interview people during this time. And I think you just recently did a set of interviews with HBS students, right?
Yeah, I did.
What's the craziest thing you found on this topic since COVID has hit? Like, and looking at all this,
I think the biggest thing that's kind of different here is the fact is like at some point the consideration set has changed. Like at some point, the notion of what a gap year means, where gap used to mean like, well, I'm just going to go try a bunch of things. Now it's like, well, what do I want to get out of the way? What do I want to think about? What experiences do I want to have? Like, what's so interesting to me is a lot of students go to college and they don't know what they want, because it's, in some cases, it's been, programmed into them that they're going to go to college, but they actually don't know what they're good at. They don't know what gives them energy. They don't know what actually is really hard for them. And so a lot of times it's that notion of going to find themselves, but they're finding really different ways to do it. I think the other thing is from the interviews I found is like the shift from get into the best school to like, help me get away, is this notion of like, I want to go have an impact on the world. Like the world has almost become a smaller place for some people, where before it was like, I'm going to go get a job, or I'm going to go have a career in this area. It's like, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to go actually help people. I want to go do something that's going to have an impact on the world. And so this whole notion of like stepping it up and escaping from where they're at is so, it's like, I feel like that part of the business is booming in most cases. And in a lot of cases, I don't know if people really feel they need a degree to go do some of those things, but they want the learning. And so they're so thirsty. It's a very interesting kind of dilemma that's out there.
That's really interesting. So I think it actually is a perfect segue into my next question, because even in the book before COVID hit, one of the central recommendations of the book was many more students ought to be taking a gap year.
Yes.
And I've started calling it a discovery year, because I think it should be a year in which they're building passion, building passions, understanding their purpose, building, figuring out what are my strengths and how can I contribute.
Yep.
But a lot of students have now finally taken schools up on the offer to defer a year and take this gap year. So I think it's 20% of Harvard's entering class, for example, deferred admission.
Wow.
8% at MIT, 8% at MIT, which is 8 times what it normally is. At Bates College, it was 10%. So I guess the question is, like, put yourself in the shoes of a traditional selective 4-year institution. Mm-hmm. A lot of students here are coming to get into their best school, probably a handful of folks doing what's expected of them, maybe a small slither of people, extend themselves or something like that. Campus is closed now, yep. Right? Or yep. It's very altered. Yep. What should they be doing? What kind of experience ought to, what should that look like? How can they innovate?
So the first thing to me is that you really have to take a very, very close look at, like, what are people actually doing now? Like, if they're going to take a gap year or they're deferring, like, what are they really doing and what are they struggling with? Like, what would cause you to say today's the day? No, I'm not going to go to MIT. I'm going to take a year off. Like, there's some energy there to do that. And then at the same time, I would be trying to figure out how to actually understand those experiences, because I think, as we found in the book, there's this notion of they don't really know who they are and they want to actually have experiences around it. But I feel like the things that the people who have interviewed around kind of this gap year notion right now is they're fumbling. They're literally, like, struggling to find out, like, what should I do and how does this work? And I don't know what to be. They need some guidance, but it's not like academic guidance. It's more like how do you get a range of experiences? How do you actually figure out what you don't want to do? Like, there's a whole bunch of things here where I think that if I'm a school like that, I think help them double down and make sure that year's useful is number one. That would be one place I'd innovate. But two is, my belief is a gap year is actually something that they should be doing in that first year anyways. Something where it's a wide range of experiences and it's a combination of academic, some academic, but it's also about kind of finding themselves and finding kind of their skills and where do they need to hone and refine and where do they need to let go. And so I think this is the thing that, like, in Get Into My Best School, they kind of count on people to do that. And that's where satisfaction actually lags, because it's like, well, I'm just going to go and I'm going to have a great experience and they're going to figure out, kind of help me go where I need to go. But most schools aren't doing that anymore. And the longer you stay, the more they make. But at the same time, the fact is it's not on the college to actually help you figure it out. But I think it should be. I think as a consumer, as somebody who's trying to figure things out, I think the notion is, I want you to help me to do that. And so those are the kinds of things I'd be studying. I think the other thing is I would be figuring out, I think that you're going to see a lot of things where people are wanting to get the knowledge to do things, and that the how do we say, the degree itself is not the ultimate of tools anymore. It's enough knowledge to go do it. And so what you're finding, for example, some of these boot camps and some of these other places where people are learning enough to then go do something, and they're fully satisfied to learn enough without necessarily the rigor of the degree. And so I think there's a lot of non-consumption out there where people want to learn, they've got time to learn, they want to fit it in, but the whole thing is everybody's pushing for it to finish. And for them, they finished a while ago.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just riffing off some of that. Since our book came out, I've had the opportunity to get to know a lot of these formal gap year programs, if you will, curated gap year programs, right? And interviewed a bunch of the entrepreneurs behind them and some of the students that have partaken in them as well. And what seems to me the big missing opportunity from a university perspective is what you just said, which is that they should be turning their first year experience into a curated gap year program themselves. And maybe that's an outsourced arrangement you do with a partner. Maybe it's something you do yourself, but it sort of means throwing out our conception of courses and credit hours and seat time and like, you've got to take introductory math before you can do other stuff. And instead it's like, how do I create a set of like 90-day sprints where you have like immersive experiences in a range of fields. And like out of each one you reflect to figure out, what did you like from this? What did you not like? Which may be easier to articulate.
Right.
And then out of that, like, what does that mean you do next? Right.
Right.
And so that at the end of this year, you've done a few things. One, you've built a ton of knowledge about what it actually is like to be in fields that you didn't know existed.
Yep.
You've built a lot of connections and relationships around that as well. You've done a bunch of projects that you can probably translate back into academic credit, I think would be the ideal.
Yep.
And you could layer in, frankly, one online course you're taking like during each of these 90-day sprints, or two maybe at most, that is somehow tied to it if like the college needed to for accreditation purposes or something. But to me, it's like, how do you curate that experience? Because when I'm looking out at the market right now, I'm seeing all these boot camps emerge, last mile training programs. But the thing that those guys are not doing, like, those guys are built for the people who are help me step it up, right?
Yep.
They're not built for the early end of it where it's like, help me get into my best, but I don't really know what I want to do yet.
Right.
And right, like my friend Ryan Craig, investor, who helps invest in a lot of these last mile training programs. The real insight they've had is that they can reduce hiring friction for employers by basically putting a temp agency at the end of the educational program, so that you'll get a job and then you can work for a bunch of clients, one of whom will eventually hire you.
That's right.
Brilliant if you know what you want to do, but if you're not there, it's absolutely not the program for you. Instead, that's where I think these colleges could innovate to create a series of boot camps that you're actually going to go through every single one of them. Is sort of my instinct around it.
So my favorite part of that story is the fact is if Enterprise Rent-A-Car, they've actually had that model for 25 years where it's like, I'm going to teach you how to do customer service, customer support, basically do all these different things. And oh, by the way, you will get hired by somebody you rent a car to. And so you weren't there to go to, Enterprise to be there for a career. It was literally almost like a gap year that you weren't ready to go out into the real world, and you could see different businesses and see different things and learn some of the basics of business along the way. And so it's been happening in the company side of the world for a while, but I think that's what you're starting to see is that migration to kind of like seeing it as I love the idea of having it be a temp agency at the end to say like, nobody can actually be here that long. So my latest form of how I'm actually hiring people is I literally say, you're only going to be here for 2 years. What do you want to learn? What progress do you want to make by being here? We meet every 90 days to talk about it. And then what we're doing is starting to think about where are they going to go next? Because what I've learned is if I don't help people make progress, I like at some point, then I end up having to manage them way more than them being motivated to learn new skills and do new things. So I think that's the kind of thing that I've taken from the book and really kind of made really personal is no, everybody's got to be making progress in the company all the time.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let me shift to my my next question for you. And we're starting to get questions coming in as well, which is great. I'll start firing them soon. But first me. So the next question I have is, like, put yourself now in the shoes of the boot camp or the upstart, online program or whatever it is. A lot of people, I think, are hiring you to help them step it up. Some of them to extend themselves. Like the world's changed on you as well right now, right? A lot of these boot camps, for example, were in co-working spaces. All of a sudden they're online.
Yep.
My guess is that some of that community aspect of like, we're in a cohort and we will not let you fail, right? Which is, I think, important for step it up, less so for extend yourself, is maybe not there. So I guess the question for you is, what are the opportunities for those folks to innovate, and what are the pitfalls that you see in the current moment we're in?
So I actually kind of disagree in that context. I think so I've been working with Techstars and Y Combinator and different people for a while in different entrepreneurial programs. And what this has done is it's made it acceptable for me to be talking to you today from Wisconsin, a farm that's been in my family for 120 years. And I can literally help people without having to be there. Where Techstars required me to be there, or we could get on a call. Now everybody is so much more efficient with the time that I can actually help 10 more teams in a much better way. And I think they're learning to be way more prepared Where before it would be a process that they go, okay, we're gonna talk about this week. Here's what we're gonna do. It's like, it's making it way more almost flipped classroom like, where they're doing all the lectures like whenever they can, and they're recording them and getting done with that, so they can go have real interactions with real people. I think the harder part is that the way it used to be structured is you do a startup, or you do some of these kind of the entrepreneurial thing around, you had something you had a passion in, and then you'd kind of figure it out from there. And the reality is, like, at some point the struggling moments are so broad. I've like, there's a couple Techstar people that I've advised, and they were literally going after something they were very passionate about. And eventually, as COVID hit, they realized, like, okay, this isn't going to take off, but us learning this has learned us to basically figure out how to help people during COVID for doing these things. And so it's like these big pivots are happening, which is really kind of cool. So I think the thing is that I think it's forcing people to think differently and work differently. And I think the fact is so I joined a school, of all times, I joined a school board in June, right? Primarily because I want schools to realize, like, they have to lean into this. Like, there's so many schools that the school that I joined was like kind of leaning back, going like, well, we'll just wait and see what the governor has to say and what everybody, and I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, this is going to change the way education is done forever. It's like not going to be the same. And the reality is, like, even if we go back, the thing is there'll be kids who are learning way more virtually than kids who aren't. And so all of a sudden now you're going to have a mixed classroom of both. And what are you going to do? And so all of a sudden you start to realize, like, this is actually the shakeup that we need to actually start to innovate in schools again. So I'm excited.
Yeah. So just actually riffing on that, and I know our like tagline says higher education in our virtual backdrops, but I think one of the mistakes
you got to go through lower education to get to higher.
Well, so that's where I was going to go is, I think the point on K-12 is right. And I'm hearing, I mean, I've been so frustrated that more school heads and superintendents are not innovating in this time right now. It's just like everyone's worrying about the configuration of schooling and not thinking about, oh my gosh, like I can do X, Y, and Z now to better reach each individual student. It's driving me nuts. But I think what you just said is spot on. So many folks are sitting back and waiting for the governor guidance, and they're saying, oh, the State Department of Education isn't giving us leadership on this. You be the leader. Like and a big miss for me in our book in retrospect, and I know we both have sort of things we would do differently, but
we can always write another version of it, I'm sure.
We're going to, hey, stay tuned. But but a big miss is like our K-12 system has failed for many reasons, but one of them being that it does not allow individuals to work on building passion, to figure out who they are, discover purpose, figure out their strengths much earlier in the process, and get exposed to a range of individuals out there. I mean, like, you've heard me joke a million times, you're an engineer. I grew up in Washington, D.C., inside the Beltway. I didn't know what an engineer, Bob, was until like junior or senior year of college, because I never met one. Like, we don't have engineers in Washington, D.C.
So badly for you. Like, I'm like, how do you not know what that is? Like, and what I would say is, I'm somebody who's been breaking things for 50 years and fixing them for 45 and building for 30. And my thing is like, to know the world without engineers, like, wait, what? And so this is where I think this exposure part, and whether you like to do it or not, is part of it is exposure and understanding what it means and what you do. And I think that's the thing is that we're feeling like if we give that foundation in place, that's what's going to actually help them get their passion. I'm not sure that that's happening anymore. So I think that's why we have this gap year opportunity, to be honest, in higher ed, is because they're not doing much, I'll say, career planning, if you will, or any of that kind of stuff, as far as I can tell, at the K through 12 level.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So on that note, I want you to put your entrepreneur lens on. You've had the chance to look at this market now for a while. You've talked to a lot of college presidents, deans, provosts, whatever, boot camp leaders, et cetera. And you have the benefit of our research.
Yes.
What's the opportunity you most want to do or build right now that's not being done to your knowledge?
Yeah, so I would say you're way closer to the market than I am, but I think there's two really big spaces. I think the notion of modularity of being able to learn in the moment and being able to accumulate the learning through real work. I think this aspect of being able to say, like, I don't need to take this class. I need to actually learn these skills and do these things and solve this problem. And when I've done that at work or whether I've done that in the real world, like, how can I actually merge the learning and the education with work? And I think that that's the thing where it's almost like, that's why I get so excited about the notion of, like, you're going to learn these things and then you're going to be a part of a temp agency. I want them to be in the temp agency when they're actually in school.
Yeah, and to
So
be
they
and,
learn
and to
it
be fair,
and
I
go.
think sometimes they merge those things. But yeah, keep going. Yeah,
But
totally.
I think the thing is so one of the things I'm studying right now is basically where do people learn outside of when I'm at work and I don't know something and I need to know how to do something, and whether it's a new technology or whether it's a problem I have, like, how do you go find these things? And so what you start to realize, number one, is most people don't know how they learn. Like, I know, like, if I have to learn something, I know the exact sequence of things to do. My mom taught me that because of my disability. And so the whole notion of learning how we learn, I think is like, if we can crack the code and understand the pathways of how people learn, or at least get better at it, because it feels like everything is still taught the way people want to teach, not the way that people want to learn. And so I think that there's an underlying technology there. I think the other one is then being able to be modularized, the way we end up serving up education. So we don't have classes, but I can almost like take recipes and put them together and got to go, like, all right, you've got to be able to do this, and giving people tasks to do very productive things that are satisfying to them. They will learn when they put it together. So this is why I'm a big fan of project-based learning in the K through 8 market or K through 12 market, because I just think that learning, life is integrated. It's not this, you learn math and then you learn English and then you learn, like, it's this fact of how it's integrated. And I think that the way that our children are being raised and the technology they have wrapped around them is way more integrated than we were. And our parents were. And so I think this is the thing where figuring out how to be more integrated in the education, figuring out how to actually modularize the learning, and actually have people go to work and school at the same time and learn by the work they do and the challenges they overcome and the skills they develop. I think that's going to be actually a way more productive way to think about partnering with people. And so that the notion of the temp agency and other things, there's still two separate compartments. Like, you go to class and then you go to work. It's like, no, what if it's just one thing?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And just to riff off that and how you would modularize it, the thing that seems to be missing to me still is some way to certify or credential or show, I don't know what the correct verb is, but that you've actually acquired those skills. And it could be through a traditional assessment, but I think what I'm more thinking about is like a way for you to have a portfolio of projects that experts look at and say, like, oh yeah, Michael can do X. Like, look, he did it here. And like this, and like, it's like the project, I do the project in your project-based learning example.
Yeah.
And then there's a performance aspect at the end of it where someone's actually looking at the work and certifying that, like, yeah, you actually were able to exhibit this set of skills, which is valued in the market. And when I look at it, like, I actually already think we have modular education. You look at like YouTube or all the mobile learning or Duolingo, or like, it's all out there, but we have no way of recognizing what someone has actually mastered and can do with it.
Well, that's one. I think the other side is, if you think about the employment side, right? They still have job descriptions as if it's like, 1950. Like, how many years? Like, I think the reality is so I'm working with some other people around the fact of changing the work world to say, like, what progress are you trying to make as a company, and what progress are you trying to make as a person, and how do we match you for the progress, not for who you are, but who you want everybody to be? Because to learn on the job is actually way more effective. And so this whole notion of, like, instead of just, oh, we have an opening. Okay, we've got 50 resumes. Okay, let's pick the best resume. And we use the college to do it. Like, just because they went to the best college doesn't mean they can actually handle what we're actually, the context we're putting them into. So we're spending time to talk about what context they're working in, what progress do we need them to make in the position that they're doing, what are the tasks, but also what are the skills they need to develop, and where do they want this job to go? Like, most people think jobs are static, but they're not. that's the other part is I think we're still trying to build to a static spec of if you're an accountant, here's what you got to do, and if you pass the the it's not the bar, what's the other version of it? But anyway,
The CFA,
the CFA or whatever. It's one of those things like, well, then you're the CPA exam, you're good, and it's like at some point in time, those professions are changing so fast that I think the reality is like at some point we do need some certification, but like John Palmer's doing some great work around trying to understand the blending of like, here's the best part is I think I can actually go to almost any industry and I'm not seen as somebody who's in any one industry, but actually I am involved in every single industry. And so what profession am I?
Right. No, I think it's a good point. And I guess my gut tells me that there's a place for both, right? Yes. So that the CPA is useful as a baseline set of skills someone has, mastered. And I also want someone developing in line and doing projects and so forth. And so there's a question we got, and I'll start to ask some of the questions we're getting because I guess we got like 8 minutes left or something.
Yeah, we're getting close on time, my friend.
We're getting close to the witching hour before we get cut off. But one question is, do you think blockchain technology can disrupt higher education? And my quick reaction before you go is I don't really, like, a lot of people are asking that question, but I don't really know what it means because like blockchain technology that codifies the courses I take or the degrees that I have and makes that more mobile, to me, that's an efficiency innovation. It makes it it makes it better to make the trains run in our current system. But our current system doesn't actually speak to any of the skills or habits of success or like power skills that I'm actually building. Like it's totally unaware of what's going on beneath the surface. And employers are totally unaware in most cases, or at least the job descriptions are, of what they're actually trying to hire for in successful people. And so until we get a better language around those skills and progress and competencies, blockchain, I think, could be very powerful in that context. But I think we have to build the building blocks first is sort of my instinct, but your take.
I guess I would say something very similar, but the way I'd change it would be is like the current building blocks of what we would use blockchain for are incompatible with where we're at and where we're going. And so the fact is we have a bigger change we have to fix because I learned calculus 30 years ago, right? I still use it a little bit, but the fact is like, if you're going to ask me a calculus question, I need to do a little work. And to be honest, I'm not sure I'd have any interest in answering it anyways. I probably would, but anyway,
you might, but keep going.
I know, but the point is like, there's also like the time value of money. There's almost the recency aspect of like, what's recent and what are you actually good at and what skills are you building, right? And so to me, I think about it as like, what's growing? What are you getting better at? What are the things that are actually going to the side? And that's okay to go to the side, right? I think blockchain can kind of use it to verify. Did you take this class? Did you actually have this job? Did you like, and it's like, it's the attributes of you, but it doesn't talk about the how the attributes work together of what you can do. And so it's the verification that I think it can do. But I think at some point in time, if you like, especially being an entrepreneur over and over again, like you take your chance on people. And like, I've never really made a big mistake there. And it's one of those things where they didn't go to the best school. They didn't have all the skills in place. They didn't have, and it's like being able to mentor and grow somebody is actually just as viable and makes, in some cases, somebody more viable than another person in positions. And so it's a matching problem. And we have the wrong metrics on both sides. So it's really going to be hard to actually think about like verifying the wrong language. So it's back to a language problem.
Yeah, it's right. Clay taught us this on interdependence and modularity, that you can only move to modularity once you have verifiable, transparent, and essentially reliable, right? Standards that speak together. And there has to be a level of probably static and so I think certain fields are more likely to move in this direction and others are
Yes.
less likely.
Well, and I think the other part is Clay would say, always talk about the fact is that measurement is, I think, is the biggest problem. We tend to measure the things that are easy and then try to make them meaningful. But if we actually study the most meaningful things to measure, they're really hard to do. And they take a lot of time to develop and a lot of time to build standards. And right now we've taken, hey, where'd you get your degree? Hey, where'd you get this? How, like, these check the box things don't have any version of quality to it. And at the same time, you've got the erosion of like great inflation, where it's like, well, we can't give anybody below a B because then that's, that's bad. And so you start to realize, like, at some point the professionalism is changing. And so the things we measure aren't as meaningful as they were 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, so we've got like 3 minutes left. So a ton of questions here. I'm going to do rapid fire with you, Bob.
All right.
So almost first thing you
but
hear.
You can answer too, so that could be interesting.
All right. Well, we'll do our best. But so the question is, keen to hear our thoughts on how a university might be hired to do a gap year job. And so I guess what I would interpret that is, we just laid out how a university would shape a gap year, but what would it take for them to get hired for that purpose?
Yeah. So I think part of it is to be honest, think of it as, and again, I'm a engineer, designer, builder kind of thing. So one of the things is, can you orchestrate an experience for me before I come? So you give me 12 months and you actually start to have me do, to be honest, you become, quote, the temp agency to have me make sure I have these kinds of experiences around in my local area before I come to see you. And the question is how do you actually say, this is the thing we do to make you prepared to come to school, right? So my thing is and it doesn't have to be the cost of a full year, but it could be the notion of like, this is how we and give people the option of option A is come, option 2 is take a gap year that's facilitated by us to do this, and it's this much, and now it's about actually finding themselves. So to see, my belief is the success of people who do the gap year will be way higher than the people who don't.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the only thing I'd add is, for those that are doing it, help me get into my best school. Prestige for the gap year is probably going to be important, and give that sense. If it's help me do what's expected of me, we have to change the conversation around what's expected, to being successful and finding yourself, as opposed to just going to school. Really quick, Bob.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm going to cut you off. Go ahead.
I think pairing people, like the people who want to get in my best school with the people who want to step it up, or the people who are trying to extend themselves, being able to match different students with each other because they have different objectives, you might actually figure out a way in which to actually offer a new offering that helps that.
That's really interesting. All right. So we got like 30 seconds or so. Last question. Higher ed is an institution built around professors, research, tenure based on the future. Professors and department heads, they've got a lot of power. They become professors often to advance their subject, not necessarily to help students get the jobs they think they'll get as a result of the degree. What do we do about all of that?
So I think, this is a systems problem. At the end of the day, you have to separate the systems and understand what's happened is we've actually merged systems to say, well, you're a professor, so you have to teach, but you want to do research. And we're actually confounding the two roles. And my belief is that we have to think about how to actually understand the underlying systems that we're trying to build, and then understand the roles that we want people to play in it. And what's happened is we're trying to be efficient, but we're not actually trying to be effective. And so we're actually sacrificing effectiveness for what we need.